welcome to everybody who is who's just joining us for this session. We're going to get underway now and allow anybody who arrives just to join in as we get going. So welcome, good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you're joining us from, or good morning. My name is Harriet Wenberg, and I'm the Executive Director of INTBAU, which is a global network dedicated to creating better places to live through traditional building, architecture, and urbanism. And we've been underway for about 20 years now as a charity based in the UK, but with chapters in 34 different countries around the world. And we have a membership scheme as well, so anyone is welcome to join us as a member at intbau.org. And it's completely free to join and will mean you're kept in the loop for other talks like this and projects and workshops, conferences, bits of research that we're doing all around the world. So a great pleasure to be starting today's talk, which is with two of our professional members, Ethan Anthony and Sarah Goss. So I'm just going to introduce them both very briefly before they each speak about their work. They're then going to have a conversation together, just talking about some of the ways in which they're coming at a similar material for similar ends, in both similar and slightly different ways, different careers and different routes into it as well. We'll have time for questions at the end with participants. So at any point during this event, please type your questions into the chat box, and we'll then have those moderated and passed on to Ethan and Sarah at the end. So first, to introduce Sarah Goss. Sarah is part of INTBAU's group of young practitioners. She's based in West Sussex in the UK and has a degree in restoration and decorative studies, where she learnt the traditional methods used for gilding, plasterwork, stucco, and wood carving, and specifically talking about wood carving, those elements of her work today. After graduating with first-class honours, Sarah went on to start her own business, specialising in carving in 2009. And Ethan Anthony, who's going to be speaking about his work first to get us started, is a member of INTBAU's College of Traditional Practitioners and is widely recognised as one of the leading figures in the design of new traditional American church architecture. Ethan served as a design instructor and thesis advisor on the faculty of the Boston Architectural College and subsequently taught design at Roger Williams University while also practicing architecture. And in 1991, Ethan merged his practice with Cram and Ferguson Architects, which is the continuation of a firm originally founded by Ralph Adams Cram back in 1889. So from there, it just leaves me to hand over to Ethan, who is going to talk us through his work before we hear then from Sarah. Thank you very much, and over to you, Ethan.
Well, thank you very much, Harriet, and thank you for putting this together. You and Juliet have done a wonderful job, and I'm very pleased and honored to be asked to join you. So without further ado, I would like to introduce some of the work specifically that we are doing. We work a lot in religious architecture, as Harriet said, and I want to specifically talk about how we are integrating architectural arts and crafts into our work. So by way of introduction, the modern aesthetic that we're all accustomed to, we've all grown up with, at least in our generation, is a world of partees and pilotis and patterns, axonometrics, and pen on white mylar drawings. It's a world of perfect and radiant visions. The essence of the modern movement was to remove us from the problem, to establish an us, the designer, and an other, the object, the problem. The problem was, as in this Peter Eisenman drawing, an axonometric drawing, where the problem becomes an abstract and something that's very removed from us in the process. And in the process, our environment becomes abstract and in a way becomes alien to us. Of Corbusier, you know, this is his modular man. For him, modernism was all about systems and automation. The modular of Corbusier, the automated production of machine-made details of mise, the machine smooth look of curved wood of Alvar Aalto. Less was more, Japanese minimalism, and the parti were king. The mark of the crafter, the knife blade, and the hammer blow disappeared and was not to be seen. It was a perfect world. But we rebelled against that world, and the photograph here is a picture of the Yale School of Art and Architecture in 1969, when the student strike took over the architecture building and set it on fire. So we were a very rebellious generation. I wasn't there for this personally, but I didn't really object. I mean, the idea was that the old order had to be changed, and that this brutalist concrete aesthetic and the technological world that it represented was no longer responsive to the problems of our lives. This photograph is a photograph of a fairly recent contemporary church, and it's in the modernist style, and it really is very exemplary. It demonstrates what we were having a problem with. If you were to remove the cross, you wouldn't really know that it was a church. It's a really such a ubiquitous sort of type. It could be anything. It could be a funeral parlor. It could be a gambling parlor. There was really nothing to inform you about what the church was. And even worse, this is the cathedral, Rafael Moneo's Los Angeles Cathedral. You have an architecture of religion that's not only hard to identify, but also is almost antithetical in the sense of appearing to be more like a fortress or a almost prison-like in its quality. Less clutter, but in doing so, in removing the meaning and removing the chisel marks and the hammer blows and the identity of the craftsman, we've lost also so much of the meaning of the building. So what do we as postmodernists, what did we start to look to? We started to look back at our own sources and our own cultural sources, and the sources that we found interesting. We wanted to see something that gave value back to the piece. And here you see traditional English craft, particularly woodwork, that I was looking at very early on in my career, and thinking how this was full of meaning and very exciting and mysterious, and what was the meaning here. And of course, when you start to really look at the meaning, there's a great deal there to find. So abstract pattern was not really enough. The legacy of English and French woodwork and stonework was vast, and it was available to anyone who just wanted to look. It is a great museum of the art and craft of handwork. So over the last 20 years, my wife and I have spent our summers, and at times our children as well, crawling through the great European monuments of craft work, monasteries and churches and civic buildings that present the observer with examples of fine architectural artwork, woodwork, stonework, and metalwork. It's critical these monuments are being preserved, and they are now the textbook that we are using for the work that we are doing. One of my first influences was the work of Paolo Soleri, who argued in his book of essays, The Bridge Between Matter and Spirit is Matter Becoming Spirit, that an architecture of craft was the means to a utopian world where the spirit of the individual would be realized through craft. I was also deeply moved in my 10 years of study of Ralph Adams Cram. And actually, these are a couple more photographs of the great craft work that you can see in an English church. I was deeply moved in my 10 years of study of Cram and researching my book on his architecture. He described growing up on his grandparents' farm in New Hampshire and the complete self-sufficiency he saw there with its blacksmith shop, coopery, woodworking, and other shops where a complete wagon could be built of raw materials. Cram connected this to his study of monastic institutions that had formed the seed of European restoration from the Black Death. He used these things, and he was instrumental in reintroducing this kind of craft into a form of architecture that during the Puritan years and the congregational years in this country had really been a very stripped down and uninformed kind of architecture. So over the last 20 years, I've worked as Cram did. I was inspired by him, and I was inspired to work as he did in finding things to look at in not only in the work of the firm itself, but also in the work of the work of other monuments in Europe specifically and particularly. I also looked and learned about how people are using tools, and in this case, this is a marble carver who is working in the marbles carving studio in Pietrasanta in Italy, where they are still using the same traditional carving techniques as they have always used, and they are producing a lot of our marble work as well. Here you see the finished result of one of our churches recently completed here in Boston, where we used a lot of these ideas of hand carving Gothic woodwork to embellish and decorate this church. And these are just a couple of examples of what the finished product looks like. We have a very nice hand-carved linen fold paneling, and all of this work is based on the original Gothic work that we see in Europe, but also is very specifically designed by us to reflect the values and the interests of each of our clients. And it's very important to state, and Father Rice is on here, and we're about to show you a lot of really interesting work we're doing for him right now. But I think we work very hard with our clients, and our clients are very much a part of all of the design of the work we do, and very influential in that. So I will just go through a case study, which is St. Timothy's Episcopal Church, which is in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Father Rice is the pastor of that church, the rector, and we have been working with them now for, I think, almost 2 years, first in the design and then in the production of the working drawings, and now the actual work that's going on to complete a transformation, really, of that church. And this is how Father Rice's church looked in, it was built in the 1980s, and perfectly nice building, but as a building in those years, it was kind of abstract, and it lacked very much meaning. And they tried it as hard as they could, I think, over the intervening years, to try to give more meaning to the church. But they finally decided that they wanted to really transform the church into something that spoke more powerfully to them. And so they asked us to help them with that. And this is one of the renderings that we did for them. This is actually a rendering that Matthew Alderman did. Matthew works in our office here, and very much one of my many right hands, and I should say I'm the speaker, but there are many people doing the work here, and Matthew is one of them. So if you think, well, okay, what are we changing? We're adding a lot here. We're adding a new altarpiece, which you see in the center, which will have a painting which is being currently underway. It's about 7 feet square. The center panel of the triptych is being painted in Bulgaria. The altarpiece is being made in Colombia, and we'll have some more photos of that shortly. And then other parts of this are being made here in the United States. But also the pulpit, which you see there, is being made in Colombia. The tester, which is above the altar, is actually being made in the United States as well. So the impact of this will be to completely transform the church to speak to the traditional forms of the English Gothic architectural tradition, of which this church very much identifies with as an Anglican church. I threw this in. This is not Father Rice, but this is another. I just think it's important to emphasize how critical and crucial it is to have the client be a part. This is one of the sculptors we work with here, Danielle Kirchmer, and working with a priest on another project. And you can see here the sketches that she has done are laid out all around, and they're working on the sources and the ideas that will become the architectural artwork that is the interior of the church. This is a sketch that Matthew has done early on in the process of developing this, the altarpiece for this, for St. Timothy's. It shows you that we're really thinking about so many things as we do this. The frieze that you see, which is essentially a plant-based frieze, and much of this architecture actually incorporates plants and plant-based forms, as the original Gothic architecture did as well. So we invent the whole thing. There's nothing that we're dragging in from somewhere else, but it's very much related and very much respectful of the traditions. So this is a early sketch of the interior of the church, with showing how we're going to transform particularly the area around the altar. And another sketch. And then this is the altarpiece that we will see. This work is actually being done in Colombia. The firm is called Raymond Industries Limited. I know this firm well because my sister-in-law is the head of the firm, and it's our first opportunity to do a project of this scale with them. And they actually had to build a new facility to do it in, because this altarpiece alone is a 45-foot high altarpiece. And I know that's kind of hard to believe, but because when you see it in this, it doesn't look 45 feet high, but at 15 meters for those of you who are using metric. But Colombia has a very long tradition of vernacular woodwork and actually all kinds of arts. The Colombian people are very artistic. I've been going to Colombia now for 35 years, and I have always been impressed by the great and incredible array of fantastic crafts that are available there, and arts. And to some degree, unfortunately, in the current world things are changing there, and I think it's more and more difficult for craftspeople to survive, because they're having to compete with ersatz crafts that are being made in China, strangely. I mean, it's the exact same situation that we have here in the United States as well. And so it's very important, I think, to support the carvers and crafters who are still there and still capable of doing that. And that's something that we're doing. Jenny Ray, my sister-in-law, actually had to go and recruit quite a small army of carvers to do this project. There are 12 carvers, I believe, 12 carvers and craftsmen who are directly working just on the altarpiece. And then there are, I think, Jenny actually has 30 people working in her firm on different parts and pieces of this work. So here they actually had to mock up and really build in place the main part of the altar piece in order to make sure that everything would then, at once taken apart, would go together properly. So here, this is the process that is going on right now. They have just completed several parts of this piece and sent it out. It's been crated and sent out to another facility for finishing in preparation for shipping it to the United States. And we have some little bits here to show you of the work in progress.
Gabrielito, cuéntanos, ¿qué estamos haciendo? Estamos haciendo el retablo de las flores de lis. Esta es la flor de lis. Está tallando sus herramientas, tallando a mano toda una obra de artesanía, de arte, que va para la corona del púlpito. Del púlpito, sí. Gabrielito, sí. Que va para una iglesia en Estados Unidos, en North Carolina. San Timothy Episcopal, en North Carolina. Nosotros nos ganamos este proyecto y acá lo estamos trabajando. Podemos ver ya la calidad de la talla que está haciendo Gabrielito, artesano santanderiano, trabajada en madera cedro, secada al horno con registro del ICA para exportación. Muy bien, Gabrielito, muchas gracias.
So that's you can see the quality of the work and how many of those he's already completed. So he's I mean, the pride that he takes in the work is incredible. I think it's worth noting that this is a cross-cultural enterprise, and there is a certain amount of cross-pollination that's going to happen with this. So the things that Gabriel is learning to do, he's going to take back and incorporate in his own work, and we also learn from him and learning what can he do and how can he do it and how can we design things better so that it'll be easier for him to do. And this is another piece that has a little bit less carving in it, but even the parts that could be done with a router are done by hand, including the inscription on. There's a sounding board in the back in the rear that you can see that will be actually mounted over the top of this pulpit. And this is the sounding board, and all of the carving here, the inscription was carved by hand as well. And just a little view of what the work is like. Columbia also has wonderful resources in terms of woods. All of the wood that we use is certified so that is not causing any kinds of problems in the forest for forest clearance or anything like that. It's all essentially farmed wood. And then just a couple more close-ups to show the quality of the work. We really believe that decoration is important and should not, it's a bearer of meaning and should not be ignored and should not be erased from our work. We want the mark of the craftsman. We want to see the mark of the blade. And that is what we aim for. And I guess in a Puginian sense, you know, the decoration is never added, it's always part of the work we're doing. So you can see here how happy they are to be finished with this piece. And now I would like to introduce Sarah Goss. She is a craftsman, as she has already been introduced, but it's Sarah, you're up.
Thank you very much. That was fascinating. It was wonderful to see your carvers. Bear with me 2 seconds while I just get my presentation up. Right, so today I'm just going to talk a little bit about the process I go through when I do my wood carving, together with the tools I use, and also a little bit about how I got into wood carving. It's quite an unusual sort of thing to do, and what I hope for the future of wood carvers and the next generation coming through. So to start with, I'm just going to show you how I start all my projects. So I start with the initial ideas coming from the client. Sometimes they've got a very clear idea of what they want. Sometimes they know they want something, but they're not quite sure what. So the amount of design work I have to do varies greatly. I always do hand-drawn work, purely because I haven't actually had much of a need to do any CAD drawing. A lot of my clients are individuals and they don't necessarily need the work to be, the drawings to be so accurate, it's down to the millimetre. And if I am doing work for architects or builders, they quite often provide me with the CAD drawing that is incredibly accurate. So for me, it works really well, just doing everything hand drawn, and see it gets across very quickly. The end result, or how the end result's going to look, and it just helps my client to just envisage what the end carving is going to look like. It's also a bit of a chicken and egg thing, because sometimes I have clients come to me and they want to know how much something's going to cost, and I can't tell them that until I know the design. So there's a bit of, you know, I have to get the ball rolling a little bit by just doing a few rough sketches. Once we've got the design sorted, we can agree a price, and of course there's so much variation within wood carving. You can change things quite a lot to suit the client's budget, which is a wonderful thing about it. You also obviously have to take into consideration whether there's a practical use for the carving, if it's going inside or outside, what wood it's going to be in. If you're using lime wood, then that frees up an awful lot in the design work to do really fine detail. If it's in oak or chestnut, it's a much crunchier sort of wood, so it might not hold some sort of detail quite as well. So there are various things you have to take into consideration, all before you even get onto the carving stage. and then once you've obviously done the carving, then you can apply the finish or leave it unfinished as the client wants. So yeah, I'm just trying to sort of get across how much is involved before you even get onto the carving stage. But it's all fun. It all goes towards the whole project, and it makes it an interesting process. Another major part of my process is, especially when doing something more sculptural, is creating clay models. I think it's just a vital part of getting your head around something when you've seen a 2D drawing to becoming a 3D carving. It's so important. I don't always use a proper to scale model. Sometimes I just make a small maquette style carving just to get my head around the various dimensions of it, the widths, the heights, and it's just a great place to make all your mistakes in the clay before you get into the carving, and speeds up the actual process when you get onto the carving because you know exactly what you're going to be doing. The tools I use very similar to what we've just seen in Ethan's project there. So I also just use gouges, which are just a name for a curved chisel essentially, and a mallet. I've got gouges that are 150 years old. I've got some that are brand new. I've got some that are quite expensive. I've got some that are from Lidl. So I use quite a variety, and I just think if it works for you and it keeps its edge and it produces the end result that you want, then that's great. I'm not particularly snobby about any particular makes or anything like that. Obviously there's some good, there's some bad, and some middling, but whatever works for you. I also, while it sounds a bit odd that I use my own competition, I do sometimes make use of CNC machines, which are essentially machines that you can pre-program with a design, and then they use cutters and router bits and drills and grinders to actually make the design. The only reason I do this is because wood carving is quite a long process, and therefore an expensive process. So if there's any way that I can reduce the cost for my client without compromising the end result, the end finish, then I'm more than happy to do that. If you think the amount of work that's involved in just getting the basic shape for a carving when you've got a big lump of wood, I'd rather spend my time doing the decorative carving rather than actually just getting the basic shape. So while CNC machines are sort of the big competition for wood carvers, I do actually use them myself from time to time just to, to speed things up, because at the end of the day, whilst I love wood carving, I am also trying to run a business and make it a viable option for people to use. So yes, I do make use of those. Having said that, I think there's a real beauty to hand carved work, and I just, in machine made stuff, it's just, to me it seems soulless. I think hand carved work is so special, and like we saw in Ethan's work there, you can see the tool marks, and to me that's just such an amazing thing. That it's a sort of a tangible link through history. Something we hear about history and it just seems like a bit of a story, but through the tool marks we can actually, is a link to the person who made those hundreds of years ago. And I think particularly with wood carving, it seems to retain a bit more of the craftsperson when compared to sort of plaster work or building, like that, purely because you can box. So here I've just gathered a few really fascinating objects. As you see, a couple of them from the Mary Rose. And I went to university down in Portsmouth, so I had the Mary Rose Museum right on my doorstep, so I've seen quite a few pieces in the flesh. So at the top there we've got what's called a linstock, which the gunmen used to light the guns, and so you'd have the bit of cord that was on fire was placed into the mouth. So here you can see they've actually carved them into a dragon, so it looked like they'd have flames coming out their mouth. And likewise you've got some bobbins there, they've got this little checkered pattern carved into it, and you think, the Mary Rose went down in 1575, I think it was, so a long time ago, and yet still to this day there's a part of the person who carved it that still lives on. And this chest, this Elizabethan chest, I thought was absolutely beautiful. You've got this fantastically carved front panels, and then in the middle, someone sort of etched in quite crudely, maybe with a compass or something, I don't know, but some initials, and I don't know, it just sparks my imagination. You think, who was that? Who did that chest belong to? Was it a wedding chest? Was it something like that? Who's these initials belong to? What was their story? And to me, that just really sparks my imagination, and I just think it's a wonderful thing that you just don't get with machined work. And this chest is actually a 13th century oak chest with these chip carved rounds. So it's quite a basic looking chest, but it just caught my eye because by coincidence I happen to be carving some chip carved roundels at the moment. And again, it's that link between, back in the 1200s, someone had this desire to decorate an item with some chip carving. And here we are still wanting to do the same, and you think how much the world has changed in between these two times of carving, but that desire to add decoration to increase identity and character to a piece, it just hasn't changed, and I love that. So moving on to how I got interested in wood carving, I was very fortunate to have quite a few stately homes not too far from me as I was growing up. So my appreciation of handmade decoration sort of originated with visits to these places. So I had Claydon House just down the road from me, so I used to cycle to Claydon House during the summer holidays. And I think even without knowing it, possibly I sort of absorbed this appreciation of how decoration can completely change a space or an item. It just produces much more interesting spaces with like real character, real identity, and I'd find myself just staring at it, just trying to imagine how you would create something like that, how long it would take, and it just gradually, almost by osmosis, sort of, I developed this fascination with handcrafted ornament. Similarly, I had Stowe House not far from me. I actually did some work experience here, and just looking at this marble hall here, you've got scagliola columns, you've got beautiful plaster frieze. You think, how different would that look without that decoration? It would look completely different, and it blew my mind how it could create such amazing spaces. And fortunately enough, I've also got a park house near me where I am now in West Sussex. And whilst we were at university, we did sort of a day trip to visit it because unfortunately it did have a bad fire back in 1989, and they did restore it, so you can wander around, you can see exactly how the rooms looked when they were completely gutted with fire. And I just spotted, as we were going from one room to the next, this serpent on an architrave, and it was a bit of a light bulb moment for me, just seeing how the new carving had been spliced in with the old original work. You could still see the scorch marks from the fire, and for me that was the moment I just went, that's what I want to do. And isn't it great that we've still got craftsmen that can produce to the level that they did hundreds of years ago? I just thought that was a wonderful thing. Again, we've got Petworth House, all these sort of wonderful National Trust properties we have here. And this has a carved room in it, which is just a real fantastic demonstration of the work of Gwyn Gibbons and probably a lot of his apprentices. I'm sure he didn't do all of it himself. And so this is, just down the road from me. So if I'm ever after a bit of inspiration, I can always go down there. You can see he introduced this wonderful style of layering up the carvings in lime wood. Previous to that, most of our carving was in oak or elm, and compared to this style was quite crude, because obviously in the lime wood you can create so much detail. You can undercut things, and it just really transforms the level of carving in this country. So yeah, the future of wood carving, it can be a bit depressing if you think there's a lot of generations of wood carvers dying out now, but I personally still think that there's a place for hand carved items. I think it feels like people are moving away from the off the shelf pieces. They want something with a bit of character, a bit of soul. You can see the tool marks, you can have it personalized, you can have it bespoke. And I personally have managed to, well, I've had a steady flow of work for the last 11 years, so that's promising. But I do think we need to focus on teaching the value of decoration and handmade items to the next generation coming through. I think there's nothing quite like making something from scratch, and I don't think you get that level of satisfaction and achievement that you through technology these days. And it's not even if people don't want to carry on a career in crafts. I think working with your hands and learning practical skills have so many transferable skills into other areas of your life. I think it's important that we don't let that fizzle out as technology seems to be on the increase. Not only that, I think we seem to be living in an age of instant gratification now, and I think it's important to make sure people are aware that sometimes you have to work a long time to get to the goal, to reach the goal you want. Any skill, any craft, unfortunately, you don't do it for a week and you're a master craftsman. You have to put in the hours and you have to play the long game. And I think a lot of kids are too quick to give up on things if they're not perfect at it straight away. And I think that is an important lesson just in life, really, rather than even just specifically in craft and education. But I think it's so important when coming to craft, because it's very easy to give up. And then finally, it's important to adapt, I think, and if there's a way we can, obviously learning traditional stuff in the classical style is very important, but if your thing is to combine traditional skills with a modern take on it, that's good as well. I think humans incredibly good at adapting, and I think that might be the key to keeping craft alive. And I just wanted to finally end on a lovely little quote that I heard from Emma Bridgewater at a Heritage Crafts Association conference, where she said, "Just be proud to be analog in a digital world." So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sarah. That was wonderful to hear both from you and from Ethan. So we're going to move now into just a bit of a conversation between the two of you, which I think you, to take your phrase, Ethan, the mark of the blade, being something that very much came into what you were both speaking about in terms of your work, your approach to work, your approach to working also with others, and in furtherance of a lot of the crafts that you represent. So we've got about sort of 15-20 minutes left to go. So talk away, the two of you, and then I'll back in about 10 minutes.
I actually think that something that Sarah was saying really rang out to me, and that is the whole question of where is it okay to have the industrial process, and and how are we're mixing those things. And if you think of the marble carver, as we saw earlier, we saw a marble carver carving, and it was actually a very interesting photograph, because the entire statue had already been roughed out by machine and industrial processes with tools. They actually have very sophisticated CNC machines for pre-carving in marble as well. But then you can actually take it even further and do the entire statue with just an industrial process. And that's what Sarah was referring to, I think, too, is wood, it's even easier to do that. And there are companies that literally say, well, we have hand carved products, but if you look closely, I mean, they may, touch it once or twice just so they could say it's hand carved, but it's really machine carved, and it's quite clear. I think the mark of the knife, the mark of the craft worker, is very easy to see if you're looking for it. And it, to me, as Sarah was saying, I think, Sarah, it's the personality of the piece. You saw, I forget his name exactly, but Gabrielle was doing, 10 or 12 pieces that were identical, and it would be very easy. And, I think the Victorian mind would say, why are you doing it, by hand if you could be doing it with a machine? Well, of course, that's the whole point. I guess. I mean, really it is. But actually it leads me to something, and we were talking about this the other day, Sarah, which is, where is the place of the carver and the craft worker in the industrial advanced world, in the first world, and where is the place of the carver in the third world? And we're creating a place for the carver in the third world, but I think we have to be sure we don't lose the place of the carver in the first world.
Yeah, absolutely. With your work, do your clients specifically come to you because they want that hand carved finish, or do you sort of have to lead them a little bit to say, oh, you could have some carved work here? Or, I suppose a lot of it's budget led as well, isn't it?
It depends. Not all clients have the same objectives. I think that most of our clients are looking for the overall look and feel. They want something that looks like those illustrations that Matthew does such a great job of, but they're not entirely. They don't always know the difference between hand carved and otherwise. I mean, in all fairness, why should they? It's kind of a specific to our world.
It's quite niche, isn't it?
So, but I think part of what we try to do is to try to educate our clients and say, well, you have the choice, and we don't preclude the choice of machine carved, but we do try to educate them and say, you can have this machine carved, you can have this hand carved. And interestingly, I mean, it's been working out that the price is the same.
Really? Wow.
So there's no financial reason to have it be machine carved, unless you insist that it has to be made in an advanced industrial economy, in which case that's the only way that it can be done when you're really doing such large pieces. I mean, we have the special case and the special problem that our pieces are large, and there's a lot of carving there. If you think 12 people working on this thing for months.
Yeah. And like you say, it depends on what it is as well. If you just got a repeat frieze, 30 meters of it.
Well, technically you would not have to do that by hand carving. That said, when I was first thinking about all of this and first becoming aware of hand carving, it was in Episcopal churches in the United States that had been done during the Gothic revival period, the neo-Gothic churches. And it's so fantastic to not lose anything when you get up close. You start looking at something from a distance, and then you start walking toward it, and there's more and more to see. And I don't know if you've ever seen it, Sarah, but if you have a great screen, with figures in it, and then you get up close and you see there's a mouse, hiding behind the tree. It's just it rewards you to get up there.
And or they put like a little gargoyle in or something. Yeah, it's fantastic. Or the carvers actually put a little you know, a little joke, funny little person in somewhere. It's great. I think yeah, you gain more from getting closer to it rather than the other way around, don't you? It's fantastic.
Well, it's the idea of the folly, you know, there that in a very serious piece, somewhere in there is a joke, you
Yeah.
know, and it rewards you as you look, or there's something in there, there's a special message that you need to really get close to see. And I think that you know, the joke is one thing, certainly perfectly fine in an organ screen, wouldn't want it on the altar, but you know,
No.
everything has a place. And you know, I would just like to see more carved and decorated work outside of ecclesiastical.
Yeah, I agree. I'm so bored of seeing just plain boxes for buildings. They're so boring.
They are.
Yeah, and then you look around, you know, you go any great city and you wander around, and if you have the time to just look up, you see all this fantastic, these terracotta tiles and you know, pediments and capitals, and we just don't have it anymore. And it's so, well, you do occasionally, but in general everything's ever so boring and plain, and it's sad. I think it's really sad.
Well, you know, I got the sense in listening to your presentation that you, like me, you have been inspired by places you've been and things you've gone to see, and not necessarily, I mean, I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, but it isn't that you always go there looking for inspiration. It's more that it surprises you sometimes.
Yeah.
And I wonder, you know, I understand how you saw those great English houses, but are there other things that have inspired you as well? Have you been on holiday in Spain and seen something, or?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I quite like some of the yeah, I mean, I showed examples of the stately homes there, but I also love some of the more, you know, the vernacular buildings as well. And you know, like say you go to Spain, Mallorca, some of the beautiful carvings on the doors of just normal houses, you know, and you think, God, they took the time to do that, whereas now we just bung a door up and forget about it. It's doing its job, and it's the function rather than form thing. But yeah, I mean, if you open your eyes, there's amazing stuff everywhere. I mean, where I am in Midhurst now, there's so many beautiful old buildings, and some of the doors are all wonky, and they're just tiny little motifs in the corner just transform it. It doesn't have to be over the top and grand. There's some fantastic things. But like I say, you've travelled extensively to England and many countries, so you know as well as I do what it's like. It's beautiful.
Well, every place has there are different reasons why people carve things or decorate, and quite often it's identification.
Yeah.
You know, that I was just in Corsica. You might notice the flag here, but I was just in Corsica and Sardinia, and they are both islands that have been occupied multiple times by multiple different forces. You know, and the people who lived there have had to try to get along with whoever was in charge, and you see it in the houses. You know, you see carved stonework that identifies with either the Venetian or you know, some other regime that that they've had to identify with. So I think the meaning, ultimately the meaning is the most important thing. And you know, you showed some examples of woodwork that interested you, and also you've done some plant form carving. I know I've seen, you know, some of the things you've done, and I think the plant form is also important in terms of what it means, you know. And for us, certainly in the church work that we do, it's incredibly important. There's nothing that doesn't have a meaning in what we do. You know, the rose means something, the grapevine means something. I mean, they're all very important as conveyors of meaning. And so that,
yeah, I mean, that translates to the heraldry as well. You know, there's so much symbolism in the way things are facing, and what, you know, the colors and things like that. I mean, it's one of those things that once you start learning about it, you realise how much you don't know. You know?
Yes. Well, yeah, I think so. And
a good place. So Ethan, I'm gonna once you finish this point, then I'm gonna cut in. So we switch to questions, but don't let me stop you finishing your sentence.
No, the only thing I was going to add to that is I think the iconoclasm of our age is what both Sarah and I are working against. I don't want to speak for Sarah particularly, but I think our generation as a generation has tried, and I guess I include myself with you guys, but I think we're all trying to reverse that iconoclasm, in our own way. And so the meaning is important, but even more important is doing it.
Mm.
Both of you have spent much of your time setting a very good example to a lot of the participants about what we can achieve in a global pandemic, and bringing sort of very practical craft to a virtual platform like Zoom with videos, and it's been really a joy. So thank you so much, both of you. I am sorry to say that we're probably going to draw it to a close now, and I'll say thank you once again.
Thank you very much. That's fantastic.